And tonight in this wonderful venue, it's great to be here, great to see those young writers asking those interesting questions. What's the worst advice you ever got? One of the students asked, great question. Give it up. Yeah, so tonight in New York, this book takes place also in New York, but also in Ireland and Africa. I'm going to read you some of the Irish bits. I'm going to be very also. 1980, the first half of the book takes place from the point of view of each of the 4 children of Rosaleen Madigan, and we start with Hannah in 1980. She's 12. She's looking at her mother. The Pope's just been and gone. They all went mad, and her eldest brother, Dan, has gone maddest of all. He's decided to become a priest, or so he says. He made the big announcement at Sunday dinner, which the Madigans always did with a tablecloth and proper napkins, no matter what. On that Sunday, which was Palm Sunday, they had bacon and cabbage with white sauce and carrots, green, white, and orange like the Irish flag. There was a little glass of parsley sitting on the tablecloth, and the shadow of the water trembled in the sunshine. Their father folded his large hands and said grace, after which there was silence, apart from the general sound of chewing, that is, and their father clearing his throat as he tended to do every minute or so. The parents sat at either end of the table, the children along the sides. Girls facing the window, boys facing the room. Constance and Hannah, Emmett and Dan. There was a fire in the grate, and the sun also shone now and then, so they were as warm as winter and as warm as summer for 5 minutes at a time. They were twice as warm. Dan said, "I've been speaking again with Father Fall." It was April, a dappled kind of day. The clean light caught the drops on the window pane in all their multiplicity, while outside 1,000 baby leaves unfurled against branches black with rain. Inside, their mother had a tissue trapped in the palm of her hand. She lifted it against her forehead. "Oh no," she said, turning away, and her mouth sagged open so you could see the carrots. He says, "I must ask you to think again, that it is hard for a man who does not have his family behind him. It's a big decision I'm making," and he says, "I must ask you. I must plead with you not to spoil it with your own feelings and concerns." Dan spoke as though they were in private, or he spoke as though they were in a great hall, but it was a family meal, which was not the same as either of these things. You could see their mother had an impulse to rise from the table, but could not allow herself to flee. He says, "I am to ask your forgiveness for the life you'd hoped for me and the grandchildren you will not have." Emmett snorted into his dinner. Dan pressed his hands hard on the tabletop before swiping at his little brother fast. Their mother blanked for the blow like a horse jumping a ditch. But Emmett ducked, and after a long second, she landed on the other side. She put her head down as though to gather speed. A moan came out of her, small and unformed. The sound of it seemed to please as well as surprise her. So she tried again. This next moan started soft and went long, and there was a kind of speaking to its last rise and fall. "Oh, God," she said. She threw her head back and blinked at the ceiling once, twice. "Oh, dear God." The tears started to run, one on top of the last, down to her hairline. 1, 2, 3, 4. She stayed like that for a moment while the children watched and pretended not to be watching, and her husband cleared his throat into the silence. Their mother lifted her hands and shook them free of her sleeves. She wiped her wet temples with the heels of her hands and used her delicate, crooked fingers to fix the back of her hair, which she always wore in a chignon. Then she sat up again and looked very carefully at nothing. She picked up a fork and stuck it into a piece of bacon, and she brought it to her mouth. But the touch of the meat to her tongue undid her. The fork swung back down towards her plate and the bacon fell. Her lips made that wailing shape, touching in the middle and open at the sides, what Dan called her wide-mouthed frog look. And then she took a sharp inhale and went, It seemed to Hannah her mother might stop eating. Or if she was that hungry, she might take her plate and go into another room in order to cry. But this did not occur to their mother, clearly, and she sat there eating and crying at the same time. Much crying, little eating. There was more work with the tissue, which was in shreds. It was awful. The pain was awful. Her mother juddering and sputtering with the carrots falling from her mouth in little lumps and piles. Constance, who was the eldest, bossed them all quietly about, and they carried plates and cups past their mother as she dripped one way or another into her own food. "Oh, Mammy," said Constance, leaning in with her arm about her to slip a plate neatly away. Dan was the eldest boy, so it was his job to cut the apple tart, which he stood to do, dark against the window light with the silver triangle of the cake slice in his hand. "You can count me out," said their father, who had been playing in a tiny way with the handle of his teacup. He got up and left the room, and Dan said, "5, so how am I going to do 5? There were 6 Madans. 5 was a whole new angle as he moved the cake slice through the ghost of a cross and swung it 18 degrees to the side. It was a prizing open of the relations between them. It was a different story altogether, as though there might be any number of Madigans. And out in the wide world, any number of apple tarts. Their mother's crying turned to funny, staggered inhalations as she dug into her dessert with a small spoon. And the children, too, were comforted by the pastry and by the woody sweetness of the old apples. Still, there was no ice cream on offer that Sunday. And none of them asked for it, though they all knew there was some. It was jammed into the icebox at the top right-hand corner of the fridge. Okay, so that's the Madigans. And this is Constance. Many years on. The best thing I heard about this, or one of the nice things somebody said to me about this book was they're all there from the beginning. You'll have to see what happens to them afterwards. But they come back in 2005, which is 25 years later. Emmett goes to Africa. He becomes the priest that Dan did not, in a way, becomes a humanitarian worker. Dan goes to New York and with immense creaking comes out of his closet. That sounds, I don't know, poor Dan. Anyway, Constance stays at home and looks after her mother the way this is now what happens if you start doing the dishes early in life. You never stop. And so for the Christmas dinner in 2005, Constance, this is a little party piece, keep you cheerful. It's 2005, Ireland is booming. Some of these things have never been in a shop in the west of Ireland before, and here they all are, Constance on her trolley on Christmas Eve. The next morning, she went in early into Ennis. It was 10 a.m. on Christmas Eve, and the supermarket was like the apocalypse. People grabbing without looking and things falling in the aisles. But there was no good time to do this. You just had to get through it. Constance pushed her trolley to the vegetable section, celery, carrots, parsnips for Desi, who liked them, sage for the stuffing, an experimental bag of chestnuts, vacuum packed. Constance bought a case of Prosecco on special offer to wrap and leave on various doorsteps, doorsteps and threw in 8 frozen pizzas in case the kids rolled up with friends. Frozen berries, different ice cream. She got wine, sherry, whiskey, fresh nuts, salted nuts, crisps, bags and bags of apples, 2 mangoes, a melon, dark cherries for the fruit salad, root ginger, fresh mint, a wooden crate of satsumas, the fruit cold and promising sweet, each one with its own sprig of green, dark leaves. She got wrapping paper, of course, red paper, napkins, sellotape, and more out of habit now the children were grown, packs and packs of batteries, double A's, triple A's, a few C's. She took 5 squat candles in cream-coloured beeswax to fill the cracked hearth in the good room at Ardeven, where no fire was lit this 10 years past, and 2 long rolls of simple red baubles to fill the gaps in her mother's tree. She went back for more sausages because she'd forgotten about breakfast, tomatoes, bacon, eggs. She went back to the dairy section for more cheese, back to the fruit aisle for seedless grapes, back to the biscuit aisle for water biscuits. She searched high and low for string to keep the cloth on the pudding. Stopped at the delicatessen counter for pesto, chicken liver, pate, tubs of olives. She got some ready-cooked drumsticks just to keep people going. At every corner, she met a neighbour, an old friend. They rolled their eyes and threw Christmas greetings, and no one thought her rude for not stopping to converse. She smiled at a baby in the queue for the till. "I know," she said. "Yes, I know." The baby considered her fully. The baby gave her a look that was complete. "Yes," she said again, and got the curl of a sweet, thoughtful smile. All this kept Constance occupied until the time came to unload the contents of her trolley onto the conveyor. The baby held itself so proudly erect. The young mother underneath it looked like a kind of prop. She looked like some kind of clapped out baby stand. "You're doing great," Constance told her. "You're doing a great job." The bill came to €410, a new record. She should keep the receipt for posterity. Desi would be almost proud. Constance pushed her trolley onto the walkway and the wheels locked cleverly onto the metal beneath them, and she was happy, happy, happy as she sank towards the car park. She thanked God from the burning, rising depth of herself for this unexpected life. A man who loved her, 2 sons taller than their father, and a daughter who kissed her still when there was no one there to see. Her feet were swollen already. She could feel them throb, hot in the wrong shoes. Constance bumped the trolley off the walkway, set her trotters thumping across the concrete of the car park. It was 11:30 on Christmas Eve. In the pocket of her coat, her phone started to ring, and by the telepathy of the timing, Constance knew it was her mother. "What is it, darling?" she said, remembering as she did so that she had forgotten the Brussels sprouts. "He's still asleep," said Rosaline. For a moment, Constance thought she was talking about her father, a man who was not asleep but dead. "Well, don't wake him," she said. "Dan," of course she meant Dan, who was jet-lagged. "Should I? Or maybe, yeah, do, get him straightened out." There was a pause from Rosaline. "Straightened out. You think? Have you got everything?" said Constance. "I don't know," said her mother. "It's a lot of work," she said, with a real despair in her voice. You'd think she had just spent an hour in the insanity of the supermarket and not Constance. "But I suppose it's worth it to have you all here." "I suppose. I'll be sorry to see it go." She was talking about the house again. Anytime she felt needy now or lost or uncertain, she talked about the house. "Right," said Constance. "Listen, Mammy." "Mammy," said Rosaline. "Listen." "Oh, don't bother, I'll let you go." And she was gone. It was Rosaline, of course, who wanted Brussels sprouts. Nobody else ate them. Constance stood for a moment blank behind the crammed boot of her Lexus. You can't have Christmas without Brussels sprouts. Sometimes even Rosaline left them on the side of her plate, something to do with cruciferous vegetables or nightshades, because even vegetables were a poison to her when the wind was from the northeast. "Oh, what the hell," said Constance. She slammed the boot shut and turned her sore feet back to the walkway and to the horrors of the vegetables section. Then over to the spices to get nutmeg, which is the way Rosaline liked her Brussels, with unsalted butter. And it was a good thing she went back up, because she'd no cranberry sauce either. Unbelievably. No brandy for the brandy butter, no honey to glaze the ham. It was as though she'd thrown the entire shop into her trolley and bought nothing. She had no big foil for the turkey. Constance grabbed some potato salad, coleslaw, smoked salmon, mayonnaise, more tomatoes, litre bottles of fizzy drinks for the kids, kitchen roll, cling film, extra toilet paper, extra bin bags. She didn't even look at the bill after another 15 minutes in the queue behind some woman who had forgotten flowers, as she announced, and abandoned her groceries to get them. After which Constance did exactly the same thing, fetching 2 bouquets of strong pink lilies because they had no white left. She was on the road home before she remembered potatoes. Thought about pulling over to the side of the road and digging some out of a field. Imagined herself with her hands in the earth, scrabbling around for a few withered spuds. Back in Okhavana, she unpacked and sorted the stuff that would go over to Ardeven for the Christmas dinner. Then she repacked that. And then she went up to Rory's room, where the child was sleeping off a hangover. Constance took off her shoes and climbed onto the bed behind him. "Oh, fuck," he said. "Your own fault," said his mother, as she spooned into him with the duvet between them and the wall at her back. "Ma," he said, and flapped a big hand over his shoulder to find a bit of her which happened to be the top of her head. But Rory was always easy to hold, easy to carry, and easy to kiss. And there, in the smell of last night's beer and of his rude good health, fretful, lumpy Constance McGrath fell asleep. Okay. Now, after this Christmas dinner, which doesn't entirely go wrong, but you wouldn't say it goes right. You wouldn't say it goes wrong either. People say my families are dysfunctional. I don't know how they're supposed to function. They're all there. Nobody hits anyone. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, Rosalie's so cross with the lot of them, she decides to go out for her daily walk. And this is a little bit at the end of the book when the Irish landscape, the green road of the book, yields the sweetness of its stories. The Irish iconic landscape of the west of Ireland, it was with some trepidation that I wrote about it at all. Here's Rosaleen in 2005. Rosaleen was on her own, and that was the way she wanted to be. That was just great. She got in her little car and she drove away from the lot of them, the big faces on them. She left them to it. Such selfish children she had reared. She left them to get on with it, whatever it was, their lives. And she came out to walk off her dinner and take the sharpness of the air inside herself, to get the sea air. Rosaleen opened her lungs and filled herself up. It hurt her chest, it hurt the inside of her. The air was cold and she was cold, so Rosaleen thought hot thoughts. Driving up over her own lawn, yes, and out the gate. She was so cross the car drove itself. They went for miles down familiar roads until they found her own stands of dark pine. They bumped past the house where Pat Madigan, her husband, now dead, the house where Pat Madigan was born, the little door painted in flaking layers of green over red over blue. They drove right past all this, Rosaleen and her little car, until they came to the edge of things. Then the car stopped and Rosaleen got out. The sea was huge for her. The light, gentle and great. The fields indifferent as she walked up the last of the hill, but she got a slightly sarcastic feel off the ditches. There was no other word for it. Sprinkles of derision. Like the countryside was laughing at her. Presences. At the gate beyond the last house where the tarmac road turned into the green road, she turned to look back on the valley of Uttara, solemn and dark now, with the flaggy shore at the sea edge of it, graves and dolmens there, and ancient roads and gateways to nothing, from nothing. A couple of houses were lit up for Christmas, the blink of the lights a glimmering from this distance. There was a little ruined church down in that place, with a curse in the name of the man who built it, too terrible to speak aloud. This she knew from Pat Madigan, who took her walking along these uplands with her little dog in the late summer of 1956. He talked more in those days and weeks than he ever did after about curses and the like, pishogues, the fairies on the mound of Crochety Hawn, and the people who lost in the scrubby, treacherous ground below it. He talked about the foxes behind Knock-On's mountain, the 17 ancient forts between here and Slieve Elva, and the goats that lived in the hazel scrub. He told her the depth and beauty of the cave called Powell Nagree, the 2 Englishmen who went down it with ropes and lamps. He pointed to the place where the 3 townlands met, Utdara, Ballinahown and Crumlin, a gap in the cliff that belonged to none of them, called Laba na Hain Vo, the bed of the one cow. There was a story, he said, about that cow and the end of the world. Then he laughed and told her about a heifer he had once who came into heat with her head stuck in a big bucket, a tub almost made out of blue metal. The handle was up over her poll, whatever way she managed it, and the bull was working her, the pair of them walking the field with the bucket swinging and banging, till she came into a standing heat and he mounted her. And the sound out of her then, he said, I'm surprised she didn't deafen herself in the bucket. There was no stopping him. He pointed to a house where a man killed himself by hanging and a rock overlooking the sea where the ghost of a hungry man was said to sit, turning to stare at passers-by. He talked of a place miles away where a woman kept her daughter chained in the hen house and a woman whose house was full of money sent by her sons in America. He said there were babies born in one house that never saw the light of day. He said that the women of one family in particular took their babies back into themselves as cats did their kittens. And it was important always to marry out in a place like this if he got the chance. And she was his chance. He did not say that he loved her. He said that if she would have him, a fine woman like her, unencumbered and free, with her own money and no one to stop her, if she would make her choice and choose him, that he would worship her with his body and with his entire soul until the day he died. Foolish, but true. That is what he said. And that is the way he saw the land, with no difference between the different kinds of yesterday, no difference between a man and his ghost, between a real heifer and a cow that is waiting for the end of the world. It was all just a way of talking. It was the rise and fall in the telling, a rounding out before the finish, a flourish, a shiver. And it was for her. He had saved every detail up for her alone, as though every rock and tree awaited her coming for its explication. And when she laughed at him, he only agreed with her. If I am a fool, he said, then let me be a great fool and not a small one. There was no turning him down. And when he entered her, that first time and every time subsequent, it was a sacred kind of pleasure he took. She was sure of it. My own Rosaline. Pat Madigan worshipped her. And he did not tell a lie. He wanted her for the money she had, for the fine house and the children he could get out of her. He laughed at her talk, and then he ignored her talk. But there were times, even in his last days, even at the very end, when he looked at her with a pride so keen it was sinful. My virgin flower, my flower of flowers. Somewhere along here, that is where the first kiss happened between them, her little dog sitting down for them to finish, looking out to sea. She had married beneath her. Even the dog seemed to indicate it by the indifferent set of her head. My life of life, my saint of saints, my dark Rosaline. And ha, she said, because she'd had the pleasure of Pat Madigan for 40 years. And ha, because he was dead and she was still alive up here on the green road. Years since she had been kissed on the mouth. years. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's such an honor to read with Anne Enright. And she read some of my favorite parts of the book. So I was back there going, oh, so powerful. Well, so thank you, Anne. And I look forward to having this conversation. So this book, I'll just start by saying that I've been signing a lot of them with this little sentence. After you get past page 6, things get better. Now, the form of the adoption that takes place, now what I was interested after that point, was how this works out. This is a traditional, as Mary Beth said, it's a traditional form of justice that is carried out in contemporary times. How does that actually work, especially when it's not, because adoption, this is not a surprising book to Native Americans, I'll just say. Especially Native Americans who are familiar with large extended families and traditional Native people. It's something like this, where two families are very close and something this overpoweringly terrible happens, that something like this could happen. And indeed, in the very beginning of times, which Mary Beth alluded to, adoptions were very common because people had to cobble together a new nation and new peoples. So this is very much part of tradition. But how does it work out? Well, LaRose has a sister, a new sister, who is Dusty's sister, and her name is Maggie. And Maggie is one of my favorite characters ever. And Maggie comes to the defense of LaRose. So this is how ordinary life starts to work out. This is how things work out between the families. First, Maggie comes to his defense. And she does so by, where's that water? I was promised that there's water. Oh, there's a glass right over here. Take it. So she drop kicks a boy named Dougie Vedder, who in the first grade, and LaRose is only like 5 and 6 now, and she is 9, and she's a big girl, and so she gets another girl, and they pick on him, and they drop kick him, but after that, his whole family wants revenge, and a sister of one of the boys named Braylon wants revenge too. Everybody does, and they all know what Maggie did. So Tyler Vedder, Curtin's Peace, Brad Morrissey, and Jason Buggy Wildstrand, well, they tried to call themselves the Fearsome Four. Until later, it never caught on, except as a joke, because they were skinny, soft, and hadn't got their growth. And mainly, they played video games and fooled around with Curtin's guitars. And they had a songbook, but they didn't know what the markings meant or how to tune their instruments, but their noise was good, they thought. Dougie told his brother how Maggie had tried murder on him, and Tyler told his friends, and they kept their eyes out for the right chance to get her. Nothing happened. After school, she always took the bus. And then because she got a part in a play as a singing mushroom, and she stayed after, she had to be picked up. And one day, they lucked out because her mother was late. Maggie was walking in a circle, fuming, kicking up leaves. It was cold, clammy, wet outside. She didn't like it. Tyler came by and said in a nice voice, "You okay?" He was that much older, she didn't recognize him. "No," said Maggie, "my mom's late. We live over there." He pointed at a garage where the Fearsome Four hung out. "Me and my bros. You want to come hang out till your mom gets here? You can see from the side window." "I don't know," Maggie said. "My mom's there." "Okay." She followed him to the garage, and they went inside, and there were Tyler's friends. They stood around awkwardly. Then Tyler said, "Want to sit on the couch?" As soon as Maggie sat down, she knew this was bad. They jammed in beside her, pinning her, and Tyler said, "You tried to kill Dougie." Then he and the other boys started putting their hands all over her. Their fingers went straight to her non-breasts, poked at her Tuesday panties. They dogpiled her, their grubby paws pinching, prodding. She had a fainting feeling like she was weak and drained of all strength. A floating grief came over her, like a soft veil, and her head buzzed. But the fingers moved harder, and a hot burn hit her gut. She shrieked. When Tyler tried to cover her mouth, she bit down on his finger till she tasted blood. Buggy pushed her back in the cushions, and she slammed her knees into his crotch, so hard he yipped and howled like a puppy. Curtains tried to keep a hold, but her thumbs went out and jabbed his eyeballs. He fell back, blinded, and she jumped toward a guitar, swung it up against Brad's face. She knocked him against the wall. Buggy was curled in a corner, bawling. Brad was wheezing. They were all in trauma. Boys, you hungry?" Their mother out the back door. "Nah," said Tyler. The boys, except for Buggy, still curled on the floor, stood panting, staring at one another in a circle. Finally, Tyler said, "Fuck, that was amazing. Hey, Maggie, we need a front man. We need a girl. Want to join our band?" "Join?" Maggie tossed her hair, inching backward, straightened her clothes. Adrenaline was wearing off, and common fright was telling her to find the door. "We'll tell if you don't join," said Tyler. "We'll say you wanted it." She stepped to the door, opened it. Rage whirled around her like a burning hula hoop. Tell? Go ahead. You know Landro, who killed my brother? Well, he's my stepfather now. He'll hunt every one of you down. He'll shoot your heads off. Bye." Maggie ran back to the corner where she was supposed to meet her mother. The car was pulling up. "Sorry I was late, honey. Did you get bored?" "Shut up," said Maggie. "Shut up? Is that any way? Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" Maggie shrieked. She ran straight into the house, into her room, slammed the door. After a while, she sneaked out to go to the bathroom, and there in the hallway, LaRose came up to her. "Quit following me around, brat," Maggie said. Her head felt funny, like what those boys did sucked her brains out. Their touching hands were gross and left germs of stupidness. She wanted to wash and wash, but she couldn't hold on to the bitchiness. LaRose was so frustrating, melting her with nothing except he never hurt anything. It got dark early, so Maggie and LaRose went downstairs to see if there was food. Maggie poured a can of Dad's beer into the dog's water bowl. He walked over, sniffed suspiciously, but the smell was good. He lapped it up. She poured him another. He liked that one, too. Then he got a smashed look on his face, walked head-on into the closed glass doors, and fell over. LaRose slid open the doors and helped the dog outside. "Poor stupid dog," said Maggie. The dog walked in circles and fell off the deck. LaRose sat down in the cold grass with him and cradled its head in his lap, and the dog was panting, its eyes glassy, but its snarl could have been a smile. Maggie sat shivering on the deck chair, looking down at them. The dog whimpered, a drunk dog whimper. "You need coffee," said LaRose. The dog didn't move. Slobber dripped until the dog's breath bubbled all over LaRose's hands and legs. Maggie watched, admiring LaRose because of the way he let the dog slobber on him. And he was always like that. There was the way he captured spiders, never squashed them, calmed hens before they had to be killed, saved bats, observed but never drowned hills of ants, brought stunned birds to life. "Nola," said Grace before dinner. A thought nagged at Maggie. She looked at LaRose, who was studying his food. He was like that monk in the brown robe, Francis. The animals came to LaRose and laid themselves down at his feet. They were drawn to him, knowing they would be saved. This thought was erased by the way her mother chewed. Actually, it was everything about the way her mother ate. She was already furious with her mother for being late, for putting her life in danger to those maggots. Nola caught her daughter's look of contempt. Surprised, she opened her mouth, bared her lips, and snatched the green bean off the fork with her teeth. Maggie whipped her head back. How could she? How on this earth? The teeth, scraping the fork, the metal on enamel click. Maggie felt a sodden roar rising. She stared down at her plates at the green beans, and then she took a deep breath, and it took 6 hand-plucked green beans, a casual, hey, Mom, then a provocative, mad flare of her eyes as she chomped the green beans off her fingers, and the freakish grin that always got a rise. Nola sat back, her fork half raised. She emitted a blistering wave of force. "This is how you eat a bean, Maggie," she said. Then she lifted the fork, bared her lips, and scraped the bean off the fork with her teeth. Maggie looked straight at her and mouthed words that only Nola, only her mother, could see. "You are disgusting." "What's happening?" said her dad, Peter, feeling the soundless screech, missing the lip sync. The dog dry heaved in the corner. LaRose took the bowl and scooped the last of the green beans onto his plate and ate them fast. He glanced over, worried, but the dog had quietly passed out. Nola's face darkened. She was panting hard now, with the shut-ups added to the "you are disgusting." Maggie leaned her chair back, satisfied. She excused herself and sauntered up the stairs. Nola's eyes followed her daughter, sour death rays. She had raised a monster whom she hated with all the black oils of her heart, but whom she loved with a deadly, confused despair. Maggie slipped into LaRose's room that night. She'd been lying in her room, cooling off after another hot shower. She'd started to cry alone. It was okay alone, but she cut off the crying quickly to toughen herself. She was a wolf, a wounded wolf. She'd sink her teeth in those boys' throats. Her thoughts returned to how the animals were drawn to LaRose. She would trust her paw to his boy hand. "Move over," she whispered and popped under the quilt. "I gotta ask you something." Her nose was still plugged by the unwilled crying. Her face was swollen, but his skin cooled the soles of her feet. "Please, LaRose, don't laugh. I'm going to ask you something serious." "Okay." "What would you do if boys jumped me? If they touched me and stuff all over in a bad way?" "I would make them die," said LaRose. "Do you think you could?" "I would figure it out." "Could a saint kill for love?" "Saints have superpowers," said LaRose. "Do you think you're a saint?" "No." "I think you are," said Maggie. She rolled over, stared at the crack of dim light under the door. It was a cool night. The warmth of him suffused the bed. The itchy, dirty, cootie-fingered film on her skin dispersed. The roiling craziness her mother caused with her chewing habits dissipated. Everything bad was drawn into the gentle magnetism of the bed sheets. She began to drift. LaRose stroked the ends of her hair on the pillow beside him. "I am a broken animal," she whispered. Oh, Maggie. Okay. So part of what happens is Maggie gets adopted in the opposite direction by the sisters of LaRose in the other family. Their names are Snow and Josette. And this piece is about a volleyball game. Volleyball is very big, and, well, I think it's big everywhere, but it's really big. Like the Diné have a really killer team, and it's really very big through the Midwest. And I couldn't use the real team I wanted to use, but I'm going to kind of shout out to the Lady Bulldogs, good teams. So, there's this really, super competitive teams. It's a passionate sport. And this is called The Wars. And what happens is they adopt her onto their team, too. I mean, they teach her how to play volleyball and get her on the team, and then they play together. And they're really good. So they have a rivalry with the town outside the reservation called Pluto. The Pluto boys were already the planets, so the Pluto girls were the lady planets. Their colors were purple and white. The mascot was a round planet with legs, arms, and a perky face. The reservation team was the Warriors, but the girls weren't the Lady Warriors. They were just the Warriors. Now, the Warriors had won every volleyball game that season, except that first game with the Pluto planets. The nights turned cold and colder, and suddenly they were 8-1 with a grudge. Tonight they were playing the Pluto team again and ready to win. I don't like that they call scores kills, said Nola. Nothing should die. Peter took her hand. Nothing dies, said Peter. It's just a word. They were crushed into the stands, parent knees in their backs, parent backs against their knees. Nola had packed a small padded cooler with sandwiches, with an ice pack. She'd even brought green grapes, so expensive this time of year. Peter helped her take her coat off or lower it. There was no place to put it, and the gym was stuffy. There was really only one stand, so the parents of the opposing teams had to sit together. They tried to group themselves according to the team they'd come to support, but inadvertently mixed. Oh, she's so small, Nola whispered, always struck by the contrast between Maggie and her teammates. They were warming up, doing stretches, pass, set, spike, pass, set, spike. And the planets are, Peter caught himself. He was going to say massive or planetary. They were big, solid, formidable girls. Maggie had told him to watch for Braylon, Buggy's sister. I see her, said Nola loudly, the harsh eyeliner. Peter put his arm around her and spoke low into her ear. Remember the other parents? He hadn't seen Braylon's parents in a while, but he was pretty sure they were behind him. Oh? Nola pulled an imaginary zipper across her lips. The Warriors saluted first the parents, then their coach, then passed the opposing team, and they fake-touched hands through the net, each of them saying, good luck to each other, the other one. Good luck, good luck, good luck. You wanted it, said Braylon to Maggie, with a smile pasted on her face. She passed swiftly, looking straight ahead. Did you hear it? Snow had been directly behind Maggie. Hear what? You wanted it, thought Maggie. Buggy had told his sister. Shake it off. Maggie had a little thing she did, a shimmy to get rid of a bad feeling or a failed hit. It was an almost invisible, instantaneous, all-over shake. The team made a circle, put their arms around each other. Coach Duke stood holding his clipboard in one hand. The other hand sliced the air with each deliberate sentence. He reminded them that volleyball was just a game, except right now, when it was more than a game. He told them about relaxed intensity. He said that they were a family, sisters, warrior sisters who would beat this team, restoring honor. Stop everything except being right here, right now, he said, and use your voice, call that ball, slap hands out there, and stay positive. Diamond was team captain. She took a look at each one of them in turn, and they silently rose and put 3 fingers in the air, and everyone thought they were pointing to the Holy Trinity, but it was their special move, W for warriors. Then they roared, warriors, 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 and jumped high and smacked hands. Josette was first up to serve. Oh, she loved this moment when the team slung off its false girly vagueness and became a machine. Rock that serve, baby. Her mom's voice was then consumed by the other parents' voices. Josette flew up and bashed it, but one of the brutal red-headed planet twins, Gwenna, caught it on one forearm. A mishit, but a setter managed to play it, and Braylon boomed it down the seam. Snow nonchalantly lobbed it. Diamond set with a precise fingertip pass to Regina, and that was that. Regina could drop a ball on a dime, an actual dime. For fun, they'd set up shots for her, 20 dimes on the floor, and she kept every one and made $2. A medium blonde named Crystal, pretty, a planet, twisted to return Josette's next serve and shanked. So it went. Josette got 6 serves in before the planets called timeout. They'll blast back now, said Coach Duke. Maggie, you're our secret weapon now. They haven't tested you, so be ready. Josette, they will try to get your next serve if it kills them. So give them heck. And everyone remember, an assist is as good as a kill. Maggie didn't think so. After each game, she totaled her kills on a piece of paper taped to her bedroom wall. The scorekeepers added them up too, and if a girl reached 1,000, she got a foot-high golden trophy, and Maggie wanted one. Newspaper headline, Girl of 1,000 Kills. She developed her jump to ballerina height and perfected a sliding tip. She could score without remembering how the ball even came at her. Sometimes she'd even feel its shadow and think the shadow off her hand onto the floor of the opposing court. When she was rotated into the hitter's position up front, the other team always wanted to show the tiny girl what. With her slippery, eccentric, high leap blocks and tips, Maggie got to show them what. Josette's serving serve was upset by the interruption as the planet's coach had intended, and Maggie felt the energy on the court shift. The warriors crouched, pep-talking one another, passing it around. Braylon was at serve, square-shouldered, chubby-jawed, goth-eyed. She didn't look at Maggie or even seem to aim at her, but Maggie was ready anyway. Braylon got an ace off her. The ball had hesitated. Maggie could swear and change direction. She flushed, but once she knew Braylon's trick, she could handle it. She watched the ball come off the heel of Braylon's hand this time and saw where it would break. Maggie was there, but the ball wasn't. That was 2 points, back-to-back aces. The planet parents were shouting. Her parents were tense and silent. Maggie shimmied all over and stepped back into the game. She kept her eyes on the serve and pried a weak rescue off the floor, but something Josette on her knees could put into play. But the planets returned the shot, and there began a long, bitter, hard-fought, manic volley with miracle saves and unlikely hits, tamed into dinky, waddle-rolling blurps off the top of the net that drove the parents nuts. They leaped up, gasping and yelling, but it was friendly pandemonium. Finally, the warriors continued their 5- and 6-point lead, and they had to fight hard for it. Luck was with them in close calls, causing a few planet parents to grumble. But the warriors took the first 2 games. Then the planets bore down. The luck went their way. So did the next 2 games. Then the tiebreaker 5th game was on. Most volleyball games were competitive but affable. Everyone was straining toward good sportsmanship. Coach Duke had even sent home a code of conduct that the player and her parents had to sign. But during the 4th game, there had been hard hits, harder looks, a few jeering yells, smug high fives on points. By the 5th game, an ugly, Electricity had infected the gym. Nola had yelled hard, but held back her glee as the coach's flyer counseled when the other team faltered. She had tried, as Coach begged, not to dishonor the game of volleyball. Nola surreptitiously ate a grape. It was disappointing, tough, tasteless, a watery chemical pulp. She tried another. Maggie didn't always serve, but the coach did not remove her from the lineup, and there she was. Up. The Warriors had lost the first 2 points, and this serve had to stop the Planet's momentum. The pressure. Why Maggie? Peter shouted encouragement, but Nola was silent. She stared hard at her daughter, trying to pass luck into her daughter by force of love. Maggie served into the net. Desolate, her mother threw her hands into her lap like empty gloves. The Planet parents with the knobby knees and the Ravitch's backs, the wild strands, cackled in pleasure. Peter caught Nola as she turned and put his arm around her. "Don't go there, honey," he said into her hair. But Nola only saw that Maggie was now stuck right in the line of fire. A sob of anxiety caught in Nola's chest, but a buttery warmth now spread across Maggie's shoulders. Maggie looked so small and vulnerable with her sylph frame and spindle legs. She could have been standing on a court alone. She crouched, arms out. Crystal served straight to her, and Maggie set for Regina's surprise left dump. Point. Next serve from Snow. The other redhead burned the ball down Maggie's left, but Maggie flipped underneath and socked it high. Josette assisted Diamond, who landed a swift spike. Another point. Another. Then tie. Braylon stepped up and flared her vixen fury eyes. Maggie's stomach boiled. Braylon slammed the ball twice on the floor, impassive and stony mad. With a flick of power, she sent Maggie her booby trap special. It was supposed to break just over Maggie's head and land behind her, but Maggie knew Braylon's arm now, and with a surge of exuberance, lifted off her feet. She spiked the ball into the donut. Kill. Nola had been standing the whole time. A parent nudged Peter, and he tried to pull her down, but kill! She screamed into a spot of silence. Kill! 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 Maggie heard it, and the butter swirled down around her heart. Peter tightened his arm around Nola's shoulder, whispered in her ear, but she was someplace else. And this, oddly, filled him with relief, because this was not fake or unreal. There was no hidden meaning. This was the Nola he knew, not the super, smiley, recovering one. This was the family dynamic, not the manufactured happy family, with no aggravation, no anger, no loud voices, no pain allowed, where he felt alone. He was for sure not alone now, because Nola was going batshit. Sit the goddamn hell down. It was the woman behind her. Nola heard that command with a grape in her cheek. She turned, opened her mouth to give a dignified piece of her mind, and out it flew, exactly like a glob of green spit, landing on the mother's broad pink nose. A shocked pause. The father lifted himself, a squarish, bear-like man with sloping shoulders, a walrus mustache, a trucker hat that said Dakota Sand and Gravel. He put his arms out to shove Nola down, but having perfected her move, she leaned forward and popped her breast into his grip. Trucker Hat yelped. "Get your paws off me!" shrieked Nola. Peter saw only the hands. Mrs. Trucker Hat was still wiping grape off her face when Peter let his fist fly. It felt so good to get the rage out. Then instant remorse as Trucker Hat bent over, face in hands. Nola, however, went numb with pleasure. The game was stopped, and a thin, apprehensive science teacher was forced to extract the 4 parents from the stands. Nola dreamily slid out, clinging tight to Peter's arm. Both failed to see that their daughter had blazed a beanball straight at Braylon as the whistle sounded to stop play. Distracted, Braylon let down her guard and sustained a facial. Now her nose was bleeding. The referee held up a yellow card, and out went Maggie to the boos of planet moms and dads. The planets, hearts blistering, played with vengeant fury and energy, but lost control, faulted, missed easy returns, tried for nasty cut shots without the setup, and lost by 8 points. The Warriors high-fived it and made a subdued exit. It didn't exactly feel good like a win. It felt like something bigger and darker had just played out. They didn't know the half of it, thought Maggie, still quiet with joy at the sight of Braylon's blood on the floor. Snow and Josette walked Maggie out the gym door. Braylon passed, and they stink-eyed her, and she strode to her parents' pickup. How come she's got it out for you? Oh, she's from my old school. I gave her brother Buggy the ball kick. How come? Asked Josette. Maggie looked down at her feet and hunched her shoulders. Oh, said Josette. No shit, she was gunning for you, said Snow. They watched the pickup with Braylon in it roar from the parking lot. Oh my God, holy! Diamond caught up with them. You know your dad punched Braylon's dad out and your mom spit on her mom? You got a badass family, Diamond said. Maggie jumped in the car's back seat. Mom? Dad? Maggie? Nice game, said Peter. Thank you. All right, now I'm going to sit down, and yes, I'm going to be joined. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
I took you. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. Some bright lights. So I'm going to begin with a few questions that I have, and then I think we're taking audience questions afterwards. My first question is for both of you. It's sort of open-ended, but both of you use fiction to explore the haunting effects of the past, to explore a traumatic history. And I wondered how close to the surface of your brains, or whatever organ it is you think you write with. For some it's brains, I think some it's the gut. In any case, how close to the surface do you wear that history or your politics attached to that history? Is it something that has to come organically, or is it something you feel a responsibility toward at the end of each writing day? Anne, why don't you begin? And then...
I think I have a kind of strangely adolescent feel about what an artist's role in society is, which is, you know, to imagine. And then, after the fact, to look at those imaginings and say, well, what does that imply one way or another, politically, ideologically, or historically? So I consider kind of imagining as a primary activity and ideology as almost a tertiary, you know. First we, you know, that ideology is a bit, for a writer, a bit of a cul-de-sac because it kind of atrophies even as it's spoken. So I avoid what I regard as finished politics, and I stay with whatever that act of imagining is, and, you know, that's utter to me, and that is what I respect one way or the other. And then I look at it and say, oh, what does that mean now? I don't know.
Okay. That's an answer. Louise?
You know, I think probably for the two of us, we can't help but write about history. I mean, I don't think there's any way not to. But we talked about this a little before, but it's the story. You following the story, you inevitably get to history because you're in it. You know, this is the Faulkner. The past isn't even past, right? The past is part of the story, and I don't write with a sense of responsibility toward or a political agenda, but there's no way it doesn't come out. It comes out in the story.
I think your character is a four-dimensional human being. You know, they move and they are, and they're tied to a particular place, a space, they're in a body, but they also, the past sort of, I don't know, funnels into them so that they exist at that time. They contain their history in a certain way.
Whether they know it or not, even.
Yeah. I mean, I always know the deep history and the deep CVs of all my characters. I know where their names come from. I know what their names mean. I know whether their great-grandparents were Protestant or Catholic and all that boring Irish, provincial, horrible, sort of small town prejudice sort of way. And I know all of it.
Yeah.
I know their history. Yeah.
Same for you.
Same. Oh, the same.
You've written
exactly.
family trees, right? And
Well, I had everything in my head for a while until, thank God, I met my copy editor, Trent Duffy, who's in the audience somewhere, and he, oh my God, he saved me because I write about the same characters over and over, and they became very intertwined, and he was able to keep track of them. But yes, I start out knowing this particular book goes back to 1839, so that this LaRose, who's the 5-year-old, has the resilience that it's said that it takes 4 generations. I don't know. You hear this? That it takes 4 generations to work out a tremendous trauma, just a tremendous trauma. So that the generations, you're seeing them work out the trauma. Well, here's LaRose, and there's the generations behind him that are in the book, and he's a resilient person. He's able to take on this role, this responsibility that he's given. And I wanted to, I guess I didn't know it, but I found myself writing a healthy person. I couldn't believe it.
The young are wonderful, aren't they? They're so clear.
Yes.
They're
He
so
reminds
clear.
me, oh yeah, he reminds me of...
Young people in Ireland are like that. I was at a funeral of a friend's very aged mother, and one generation was that size, and the generation in the row behind was that size, and then the grandchildren were up there. They looked very happy. I mean, there was a foot difference between the generations that they went through. Trent Duffy now also edited some of this.
Yes, Trent.
it's in there somewhere.
You're being recognized.
How much do you think about audience? This is a question I thought every writer would have the same answer to, but when I've interviewed other writers, I've been surprised by the variation, so now I like to know.
Reader or audience?
Audience.
Audience.
When you're writing, you sit down, you're drafting, it's the beginning. How much do you think about this thing you're working on today, how it's going to be received, even in its earliest form?
Well, the work of reputation is a whole sort of other job that some writers are better at than others. But it's not what you bring, that's not what you sit down with, for me. You have a great idea. You say, oh, everyone's going to love this. And then you sit down and it falls apart. And you say, wow, this is going to go there, and it's going to do it all. And that's a kind of fake book. And you spend a lot of time looking at its ruins and wondering how you're going to salvage something that's a real book, you know.
Do you think it's crippling to think about audience too early?
Audience.
Yeah, you read that this is a thing that's not private, actually. that it's going to be read?
See, the reader is a single individual human being. The audience is a crowd, and it rules and runs. I mean, it's ruled by it runs a different way. A crowd is a different animal to an individual.
So you think of a reader or not?
It's really weird how little I think about all that. I mean,
I don't think it's weird.
When I stop writing, I think, and I have.
I'm more surprised when people say they think about their reader all the time when they're writing, which has happened. People have said that, and that's what has surprised me. So that's why.
There's a thing when it's going well, and I say, "Oh, they'll really like this."
Okay.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think about myself. I write to amuse myself. I was so excited to write a volleyball game. Thank you. I just, I get excited to write certain scenes so I can, and I have to set them up. It takes a lot of, it takes a lot of slogging along, and then all of a sudden, I can write this, and I'm so happy. I'm addicted to that sense of things going right and telling myself a story. So the first thing I'm doing is telling this Louise a story, like the writer is telling me a story, and that's my audience. It's pretty contained.
Pretty small. Okay.
Yeah.
My next question, I have one that's devoted to each one of you. Yours is first, Anne. I think if we polled the average reader of literary fiction today and asked them to name an Irish writer, there's a really solid chance they would name you. And I think that after this long male-dominated literary tradition in Ireland, and you had mentioned earlier the Field Day anthology from 1991, including no female writers, is that something you wear lightly, or is it something, you're again going to tell me you don't think about that at all? And
I spend a lot of time going, ha ha ha, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, this is me.
And I feel one day I'll pull it out and I'll just say what it was fucking like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But ha ha ha, it doesn't matter.
For you, Louise, a more serious question. There's a character in.
That's a serious question.
That is a serious
question.
This is the most serious question, though.
Oh.
Set them up in order. Well, it's not. There's a character in LaRose that you read part of here, but I don't want to give anything away. But there's a character who contemplates suicide and all but gets to that final step, and then the child LaRose goes around the house and the property and gathers up anything that could be harmful and seems to know, how an adult would go about this, even being so young. And it just brought to mind the suicide epidemic amongst Native Americans and on reservations. And I wondered if you could just comment about that, or what can be done, or what is being done, or if I know there's not nearly enough tension, but if that's something you thought about at all while you were thinking of that particular character.
It's a thought. It's always with me.
There seems to be more attention recently.
It's always been there. It's always with me.
Changing gears back to family, something you talked about in the earlier, there was a group that met with Louise and Anne before this event. There were young high school students, and a lot of them had questions that sort of dovetail with mine a little bit. And at one point, I don't know if it came from a specific question, but you started talking about being parents, being mothers. And there was an article in The Atlantic, I forget the name of the writer, it came out a couple of years ago, where the thesis was basically something along the lines of, motherhood and being a creative artist, whether writer or any kind of artist, that those two things are antithetical. And then since then, every 6 months or so in some major place, there seems to be another piece, either for or against. So I wondered, and this is a question that comes from a very selfish place, as I work on my third book with two little kids at home, what, you want to say about that.
Well, I think Louise talked about being a mother more than I did. I'm under review now at the moment because I felt like I had to hold a thread of my writing life to get out of some kind of maze when I became a mother. That if I dropped it, I would never write again. I thought when I became pregnant that was going to be the end of my writing life, as if babies and books were in some way equivalent, and they really aren't, I mean, they really are not. There isn't a book in the world as interesting as either of my two children, and that is just it. But there is somehow a kind of, in the world of imagining and phantasmagoria that writers make work in, there is the idea somehow, particularly among male writers, but definitely practically among female writers, that babies will steal your books, they'll steal your creativity, they'll siphon it away. So all your kind of energy, all your imaginative energy will go into these human beings, but I don't know. And I said for a long time, oh, no, it doesn't matter. This is all imaginings. Evelyn Waugh hated his children so much that they had to be in another wing of the house when he wrote. I mean, men were always stomping around saying, if you had not had children, I would be an amazingly successful writer.
But men seem to be excluded from these articles.
But also the small business of looking after children. Louise said an amazing thing to the students early on, which was, what you need is birth control if you want to be a writer. That's what you need. It's the best thing I heard all night. Fucking great. Oh, excuse my language. But now I am noticing how I've lied my way through all of this. That when I'm deep in work, I'm in a place where interruptions are difficult. Put it that way. And I write anywhere. I write on a train, I write on a sofa, I write in the kitchen, I write anywhere. But there is a sense, Alice Munro's children were anxious about her writing, and she was anxious about her writing with regards to the children. But there is a kind of sense that you are going to somewhere not social, not available, certainly. You're absent. You're not like apple pie at all. And you don't want to be hauled out of there, not too quickly.
Did you say the same?
Oh, yes. In fact, we were talking about, well, yes, I did thank Planned Parenthood and thanked birth control, because I don't know how anyone can really, how a woman can work at writing if you've had a child early on, before you formed yourself as a writer to some extent. Because that thread you mentioned is so hard to hold on to when everything's coming at you. And also, you need money, you need other women. You need someone else to take care of your baby at some time during the day. You need those times. It's a huge matter of practicality. Now, do men have this? I really
more
see it
and
very
more
now,
I think.
more now. But we look, looking back, I could only see who did we see before birth control? We see Virginia Woolf had no children.
Doris Lessing left
Doris
two
Lessing.
behind in Africa.
Yeah.
And there were many women who left their children in order to write.
Yeah.
Which seems sort of crazy.
It seems like the most this horrifying sacrifice, because the thing that you said is so right, that your children are much more interesting. That's why that's my most hated question. Are your books like your children? I'm like, oh, God, please don't ask me that question. No.
Much quicker to make.
Much quicker to
Much
make.
more fun in
Much
the
more
making.
fun to make. So true.
The books come out easier.
Yes, that part you don't have to worry about, but God.
This is an audience question. What would you be if you were not writers, and why?
I'd like to be a landscape gardener. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, I've thought of different things at times. I thought I wanted to be a doctor until I saw my sister and brothers being doctors, and I thought, no, God, I could never be a doctor. I'd like to be some kind of artist, maybe a visual artist. I just don't think, I can't see myself doing anything that requires rationality all the time, decision making.
Okay. This is another audience question. As souls in love with language, whose lives celebrate it, what are your reactions to a time ever increasingly marked by images as self-expression, communication, celebration?
You mean Instagram?
I guess. Images as self-expression, communication, celebration. I guess so. So
This is a lovely question, but I have to query the word soul, and then I have to query the word love. That's all. That's how much I love. No, I'm not entirely sure I have a soul.
Wait a minute.
Huh?
Okay.
But you know, the magic moves around.
Yeah.
I mean, there's such a wonderful pleasure in language, and I don't think it's part of our human communication. I don't think it's going to go. I mean, a lot of language is about intimacy, in a way that visuals are not. So a book will always reach in somehow.
I feel that way too. I'm not so worried as other parents seem to be. I see my daughter texting where I used to sit on the phone for hours, and I think, well, she's writing. What's wrong with that? You know, and she's not. She has plenty of face-to-face communication with people. The one thing I worry about is that kids don't live outside as much as I used to live. And that was something that I was drawn in. I was only inside when, you know, it was dark and I couldn't get out. But I lived outside, and I lived that kind of life.
When you think about how a baby learns language, they do it by mirroring and imitating their mother or their father. And it is an amazing and really sort of inimitable kind of communication is there. It's not, you don't hold up a picture to your mother's picture. You go back and forth. So I think people find things in language. I mean, I don't think language is in trouble as a medium.
I don't think narrative and storytelling is either. I think that we come into the world with this thirst somehow for story, and we want it right away, and parents want to give it right away. Mm-hmm. And storytelling just has proliferated into many, many, many forms. But as a bookseller, which maybe I could do that instead, I don't know, but as I have a bookstore, and I am astounded at how it's made me more optimistic. I feel this great energy from people who come in to talk about the books and buy the books, and you know, some of it's a little crazy. sometimes. We're a native bookstore, so we also get people who come in and want, I have this object from my grandparents. Can you give me an estimate of its value? Things like that. We get all kinds of people. But I don't feel, I don't have a dark sense that we're going over the cliff with our profession.
I was a bit worried until recently enough. I mean, I was, after the downturn in 2008 and the internet, and I thought we're like the boiling frogs, that the temperature is rising and nobody is noticing, and that the internet was global warming for literature. Became briefly interested in how to maintain a literary ecosystem, and how writers, which is called getting writers money. That was what I was really worried about. I think that's very important. But things have cheered up in the last couple of years. Paper is surviving. It is not, after all, the end of days.
The last question is a process question. When is a scene of dialogue, action, etc. finished? When do you stop tinkering, if ever? I'm adding if ever.
A scene or a book? A scene.
It says a scene, but you can answer it as a book.
I'd go back now, and the weird thing about a book you read from a lot is that there's lots of rewritings go on, strikings out. It's a bit sad.
You would want to always be changing it if you could.
Yeah. Well, the worst thing, somebody says, could you make it shorter? I asked a writer to make, to just very delicately, I said, I'm going to shorten my story. Will you shorten yours? I was curating. He took out 50%, but I took out like 20% of mine. And I said, why did I put that in if it could do without it? So it's really never finished.
No, I agree.
No.
Yeah.
So once it's finished, take out 20%.
No, you could add. I mean, there are bits you could add. So, it's just not done. And it takes about, I don't know how it is for you, it takes maybe a year after it gets into print before you know what kind of object it is, what the book actually is. And then you can move on to your next book, slowly or quickly or however, because you know what you've done. But it takes ages to know what it is. It just moves around in your head.
Yeah, it almost does take that time. I've never thought of that. But it is formless. It's something that you've lived so intimately with that you can't really tell I can't put it all in my head. I resist reading or looking at books I've written because I go back and I start tinkering with them. Yeah.
It's difficult to work on something else also while you're talking about and thinking about the book you did last, right? Like in a situation like this, if you're on tour. Although some people are able to do it, it seems, and they can talk about one book all night, go back to their hotel room, work on their next book. I would find that difficult.
That's impossible.
It's really hard. No. I mean, you bring out your first book and you think in your youthful grandiosity that amazing things are going to happen. Nothing happens at all. Nothing at all. I mean, publication day, and then maybe a review or another review. Maybe it sells a little, but it really does nothing. Nothing changes. And it takes you a good while to realize that that's it. You have to spend another 3 years, basically writing sometimes when it's very urgent, feels like you're shouting with the mute button pressed for 2-3 years. You think this then goes into the world, it doesn't really. That it would be a shout, but it's not, it's just a book.
Well, I think you guys are signing, right? And
Indeed.
I'm not sure what happens next, but I want to thank you for
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.